Our first topic today will be about ensuring the well-being of our students. That as part of our presentation, we will share our seclusion and restraint data. And just as a reminder, we do a September presentation for a portion of the year's data, and then we do a February presentation to share the data as well. So we hope to provide you an update on data from July to December, and then share some of our approaches that we have in place or are working on in our special education program, and then provide some updates about some of the supports we're putting in place around school-based mental health. And so everything always ties back to our strategic plan. I'm going to let Mrs. Woodson walk us through our next portion.
Clearly, we are and continue to be tied to that strategic plan with high-quality core instruction and student well-being. As we think about empowering our students through prevention, and I shared about this when we talked about behavioral health in December, that our goal is to shift the focus, right? How do we become more proactive rather than reactive? The last time we shared about seclusion and restraint data, we really spent a good bit of time talking about that behavioral health support that we're trying to make sure happens in every classroom. And today we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about mental health supports and how we can support all students in classrooms, but also students that might need something in addition to. So that professional development, ongoing monitoring to make sure that we're looking at that data, and then the family and community engagement that goes along with that. And I'm going to pass it over to Paul Walker, who's going to share specifics around this data.
Good, thank you, Ms. Woodson. And hey, good afternoon, board members.
Hello.
And Dr. Taylor. So I want to thank you in advance for listening to what we have to say about this very critical topic. So let's go ahead and start with the core of this particular work. And so I want to start with this before I jump into the seclusion and restraint data, because the goal is both academically and behaviorally. We want to determine interventions to strategic planning, because it establishes a strong relationship, of course, with all students, right? So we have to anchor in that. So to be clear, we're not just talking about education speak, core instruction, we're talking about high quality instruction. Again, academically and behaviorally. And this is to benefit all students. And with our goal of reducing student outcomes of seclusion and restraint, we have to focus on that. So when looking at our work to improve accuracy of seclusion and restraint reporting, it's an ongoing process, and this is the process. We've seen this before when I came to you. I want to have you think of really the 3 R's here. We want to report. We have to report acts of seclusion and restraint. We have to review it, and we have to make sure that we record and check for clarification. And that's what is the key focus. The other part of this is communication to parents. So the legal training that we talk about when we're doing compliance monitoring is that every act of seclusion and restraint must be reported to parents within 24 hours. So I really want to stress that. Review, understand, and interrupt, and we have to do these aspects. So based on the data that I'm going to share today, we can conclude that these updated and strategic trainings have led to more accurate reporting. So thinking about the definitions, so just like Chief Wilson Norman said, that we are going to do this every February and September. And we always want to revisit these definitions. So not only are we, of course, continually, you're in front of me, the board and other stakeholders, but I'm also talking to my fellow parents that we have to know these particular definitions. Because understanding the difference between physical restraint, mechanical restraint, and seclusion is essential for school officials and parents to ensure that students are safe, that we are upholding the legal compliance, and we need to promote best practices in management. Nationwide, the data you're about to see, it shows in our system that restraint and seclusion disproportionately affects students that have disabilities, and it impacts students of color. So misidentifying and misreporting these 3 aspects can lead to, of course, incorrect data, inaccurate data and inappropriate interventions. So I take this work very seriously. My team takes this work very seriously, and I know you, board, you take this very seriously. So when looking at federal, mechanical, and the seclusion, when looking at federal and state for fiscal reporting and the definition, they're practically the same, right? They have not changed. But what I want to make sure is that you understand that federal is always going to be higher as we report them, right? State says it's the same definition, but the main thing is that if there's an injury, we need to report it. There's some other factors, but that's one of the main things. The federal says everything, right? And what I want to clarify to the parents who are listening, that even if it's something that I don't need to report, you need to know. And so that's a key emphasis for that. Slide 10, when looking at mechanical restraint, again, federal, state, really the same definition. But you see with federal, again, you're going to see data, it is higher, right, than state. Why? They say, look, the use of any device, right, and report any use of mechanical restraint, right? The state says if you are doing it to do some of these things, there's other things, but if you're tying, taping, or strapping down a student, the state absolutely wants that reported to them. And so when we get into seclusion, remember this is definitions for the federal and state really overlap, but this is something where they are in an enclosed space often, and they are alone, and they are prevented from leaving. And so those are key aspects when looking at these definitions. So when school staff are clear, when we're clear about these distinctions, we can make informed decisions. And we can prioritize, and you'll hear from my colleague that's all read, and many aspects from Mr. Pesh as well, to prioritize de-escalation and alternatives to any type of restrictive practices. And you've heard me say this before as well. I think when we know better, I think we're going to do better. And my big thing is making sure we know better. So the next few slides are going to be about the data. And this is just what the data says, and I'm going to clarify some things as we pick up on trends, but just looking at this slide 12. And so remember, this is 2024, July to December, right? This is what this data is showing. So overall, data one, you see 959, 959 incidents, and I'll just tell you, that same snapshot for that time, 23, was about 624. You see data two, so how many students? So you have 959 incidents. It involved how many students? 313 students were impacted. And so that's well below even 1% of our population. And I don't say that lightly. It matters. Those 313 students matter. But when we look at our overall population, it is a significantly small. Of course, where's it happening? By level, right? So elementary, middle, high. Of course, you go straight to elementary remains the highest. That's what we've seen. And then we don't disaggregate data just because we want to, but it's something as when we start looking at subgroups, that's when it helps us figure out who are the students that are being subject to a lot of this. And so data 4 shows you that black students continue to represent the vast majority of students and acts for seclusion and restraint out of the 313. So we move on, and now digging deeper, keeping that subgroup, but how about students being served in special education, the IEP status? So this is where we look at, and you're going to see this later on in the slide as well, but when you look at 250 students out of the 313 are students with IEP, right? So now we, again, have targeted clarification when we look at elementary, middle, and high. So let's look at keeping the elementary, middle, and high, thinking about gender. Of course, what does that show? 241 or so, right, give or take, out of the 313 are male. And then, again, remembering what we look at by subgroup. So that tells the story of who the students are here. So the next couple is, and I'm going to round up over the next couple slides here. So this is a good soundbite for our clarity to our stakeholders externally. We have greater transparency with what we're doing with this seclusion and restraint data. And it's through enhanced reporting. So when looking at this is where I wanted to look at it and say, okay, where are we now, right? That's the green, right? July to December of 24. That's the most recent data. Where were we this same time last year, right? That's the kind of way I wanted to look at it, and I wanted you to see it. And so you see what I've told you, often, of course, that enhanced reporting, it's more. So the increase in reported acts, this is a very key thing I want to make sure to clarify. It's primarily due to improved staff training and awareness rather than a rise in actual occurrences. So over the past 2 years, we have strengthened our training to ensure that all staff understand what we just did here, the definitions of seclusion, of restraint, and recognize that incidents must be reported and to follow the proper reporting procedures. So as a result, we are seeing more consistent data collection. So at this stage here, when looking at these numbers, I want to emphasize that we are still working to establish a baseline to our data. As staff continue to refine their understanding of this reporting requirements, I fully expect fluctuations in this data. And that's why, of course, we have a commitment to be transparent and to come here and continually show what this data is. I think it's going to take a few more years for us to really determine and analyze trends and whether these changes reflect an actual shift in practice or continued improvements in data accuracy. That is all still to be determined. And so another particular soundbite that I want to end on is just what we said, increased, enhanced transparency in our reporting. And then what is our goal? To promote alternatives to seclusion and restraint. Again, you're going to hear from my colleague, Mr. Pesh, and I want to ensure that we're not equating seclusion and restraint with a mental health issue, right? This is one key strategy, right? In enhancing our mental health supports. By doing that, we expect that that will benefit students that may be subject to seclusion and restraint. So that's our goal here. And so research has shown that comprehensive mental health services in schools can significantly reduce the need for seclusion and restraint by addressing the root causes, that's the key thing, of behavioral issues. So these services include things like counseling, crisis intervention, ongoing support, and preventative programs that help students manage their emotions and behaviors more effectively. So, and I'm not going to go into any more detail because he'll do it better than I will. So I want to close by saying that continuing to expand and enhance these mental health services, we're taking what we need to do, a proactive approach when looking at seclusion and restraint. Ultimately, as going back to the core support, our goal is to do what? Foster a safer and more supportive learning environment for each and every student. So with that, I'll pass it off to Ms. Allred.
Good afternoon. Good to see you all. So I want to start by talking a little bit about some of the supportive practices that we have put in or continuing to put into place to help our students with disabilities. So first of all, let's remember that our students with disabilities are general ed students first. And so all of the things that Mr. Pesh and Dr. Walker are talking about are also available to our students. Just sometimes our students need more intensity, more duration of the services that they're providing. But sometimes that's not enough, and that's what we're going to try to talk about today. So we're going to talk a little bit about enhanced training, and I'm going to give you some more details about that later in the presentation. But special ed services, we do offer targeted trainings for folks, and we'll talk specifically about that in just a minute. Also, we want to make sure that we are building structured, engaging environments for our kids. And again, those are structured in a specific way. We'll get into details about that in a few minutes. And then we want to talk about the mental health pieces that Dr. Walker was just talking about. It is critical that we work with our gen ed folks to collaborate together around those mental health resources, and then refining them for our students that have disabilities. One of the things we've really tried to support our classrooms in doing is implementation of calm down spaces. That's where we create a designated calm down space. Those spaces might have things like emotion identifying charts to help children identify how they're feeling. They might have sensory items. They might have avenues for them to reflect on what happened and why, so we can really start helping them become more advocates for themselves and what they need. And then we are continuing to look at restorative practices and how we might help students see the impact of their behaviors and how we might help them to rebuild relationships with their peers and the staff. We're also looking at policies and procedures and how SES can support in that way to make sure that those processes in the schools are followed with fidelity. When we go in and support, what are we providing to the school to help make sure that those practices we're putting in place are actually happening as they should be happening. And then finally, strengthening the relationships between teachers and students, but also strengthening that relationships between our school staff and parents, because they're our greatest partner in helping us figure out some of these challenging issues with children. So next, let's talk about cultivating positive learning environments. Again, we're going to go back to looking at the design of the classroom. And our SES staff is going in to help support those classes, to make sure they're set up with the space that they need so that students have movement areas and sensory areas as needed to help prevent some of these behaviors. Again, use of the calm down space within the classroom. A lot of times it's set up in the classroom in the elementary schools, but the children are never alone in those calm down spaces. So it's a way where we can help support the children to regain control when they become dysregulated. And then finally, all of that hopefully leads to the reduction in the use of seclusion rooms and the restraints, because we're being more proactive and helping get ahead of those behaviors. So how do we do that? Some of the things that we use in special education, you've heard these terms before, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are. So when students start to have behaviors that are impeding their learning or the learning of others, one of the first things IEP teams do is conduct a functional behavior assessment. Functional behavior assessment is to intend, we say that all behavior has a function. What are the students getting out of that behavior? And then how can we help, through a behavior intervention plan, them get what they need in a more proactive and positive way. So we conduct the functional behavior assessment, and then we typically develop a behavior intervention plan. An IEP, an individual education plan, are the services the child needs, but specifically a behavior intervention plan gives the adults that are working with that child the strategies they need to use to preempt that dysregulated behavior. And that comes out of the findings from the functional behavior plan. Then if needed, we do develop crisis plans for when children do become dysregulated and they're of harm to themselves or others. What are staff going to do to keep everybody safe? And we try to articulate all the steps in that process clearly through the IEP team. If needed, we have specialized programs. You all know that we have the elementary behavior support. We have AU standard course of study classes where There's additional staff to help those children regulate in the gen ed classroom and in the special ed classroom, whatever that least restrictive environment is. And then in the middle and high school, we have behavior support teachers and autism support teachers that are specially trained to go out into those general ed classrooms where those children with behavior challenges are, to support them in the classroom, live when it's happening, not later after it's happening. And then finally, one of the things that we really worked a lot on this year is developing those collaborative relationships. We have a relationship with Autism Society of North Carolina, as well as some other folks that are able to help us develop specialized plans for some of our students that are really struggling. We bring in applied behavior analysis with a board-certified behavior analysis or a registered behavior technician. We're really starting to utilize some of those professionals to help us refine those plans where we've implemented that behavior plan and it's not working. So what are our next steps? So we're trying to be strategic about how we move forward to start where the student is and then refine that plan as their behaviors change, be it better or they're continuing to struggle. So the next thing SES is doing is working on professional development. We are currently finalizing training for functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans with our staff. We developed that training in collaboration with Autism Society of North Carolina, as well as a private ABA provider that we've contracted with. A lot of our parents use them. We had them look and give us feedback on this training. Currently, that training has been presented in first draft to the special ed service staff. They gave us some feedback. We're going back to tweak that training. But eventually, we hope next year to roll that training out to all of our teachers and administrators so that they have a better understanding of what is a good, robust functional behavior assessment and how do we write a behavior intervention plan that's really going to help that student stay in a regulated state. We also have continued support and training for de-escalation. We have a set-aside de-escalation training that we do in places where we're asked or there's a situation that arises where through the data we see maybe a school or a department needs support with de-escalation. In addition to that, we offer CPI training. And I hope you all understand that 2/3 of that training is on de-escalation. Like the last very short portion is how to restrain children to keep them safe, but the majority of that training additionally is about de-escalation. You can see that there's ongoing training. We have currently trained 3378 staff. We had a 3-year rotation on that, but we've reduced that to a 2-year rotation so that we're really getting in front of staff more often to make sure they're remembering those strategies that they need to be using in the classroom. Our staff is providing that training almost every Wednesday in Crossroads too. And then finally, like I spoke to you, Autism Society of North Carolina. We use them a lot when we are starting to see students' behavior escalate, and they are great partners to come in, look at a classroom, look at students, provide support to a teacher about how they might redesign that environment, or what kind of supports can they put in place, or what kind of data do we need to be taken so that we are really making the right decisions for our students with disabilities. And then some of the strategic opportunities, we, again, like Dr. Walker, we're spending a lot of time looking at that individualized restraint data and what happened. We're having conversations with school staff about how we might do things differently the next time. Additionally, we've looked at the global data, and we are starting to provide just support to those schools where we see trends starting, where we can, again, help that staff with collecting the right data. Maybe they need specialized de-escalation training. We are reviewing, our behavior specialists are reviewing progress monitoring data. They're looking at the FBAs and BIPs in those classrooms how they might need to be reformed, and then getting in front of that IEP team to try to help them make the right decisions so that students are moving in the right direction. And I'll pass it to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you again. The last time I was here, we talked about attendance, and as part of that conversation, one of the things we talked about is root causes. There's no student who misses school just because they miss school. There's a whole host of root causes. Same thing goes for incidents. There are a number of root causes, and just to reiterate what Dr. Walker said, mental health is one of those causes, perhaps, but not the only cause, and we want to make sure, though, that we highlight today how we're helping to address incidents for students who have mental health related issues. And to do that, I want to start out by looking at a couple of national statistics. So just for information, approximately 20% of youth aged 12 to 18 suffer from a mental health condition. And about half of all lifetime mental health conditions are usually diagnosed by the age of 14. 75% of them are diagnosed by 24. So we're usually getting to know these issues while we have children in our schools. 40% of students with emotional, behavioral, mental health disorders graduate from high school compared to the national average, which is about 76. So students who receive social, emotional, mental health support in schools, of course, show a significant improvement in mental health symptoms and social skills. School-based interventions have led nationally to a significant decrease in classroom disruptions. Schools with comprehensive mental health programs usually see about a 25% reduction in student absenteeism, and we also see that it supports to improve student self-esteem and overall regulation, which correlates to the incidents that we talked about today. Supporting mental health is not just about treating a disorder, but it really is about helping to create a supportive fostering a supportive environment for all students in the building. We've also talked before about our school-based mental health program. I wanted to kind of do a quick review here of where we are with this. We are still in the midst of doing a service expansion. We want to be able to continue to provide a therapist in more schools than we have. Right now we're in 94 schools out of our almost 200 schools. One way we were able to increase that this year is we added teletherapy as a service modality across all grade levels. We were a little surprised to see that it took on so well with the elementary groups, because the requirement for doing teletherapy at elementary is a family must participate on the screen with the student. That's because our high school students are able to engage in dialogue, but elementary usually we do play therapy and things of that nature, and so having the parents is key to be able to do that, and we're seeing that happen. Some of those are doing it on weekends. We've noticed that typically is the time that they're participating in that. We are trying to reduce the barriers for students to be able to participate in services. Most of the time it's related to transportation. They can't even get to the service. And for others, if they do get there, they might have to check their student out for the entire day to get to a 1-hour session. So by having them attend an in-school session, they're able to decrease the amount of instructional time that they would miss otherwise. And like I said, we have 94 schools now. Our goal is to get to all schools by the end of the 25-26 school year. One way that we are hoping to be able to reach that is with the Mental Health Matters grant that we were awarded, that we got notice this past October 2024. Funds became available on January 1st of 2025. We are still in the implementation phase, and we have a 6-month runway to be able to provide direct services to students. If we do this, we'll be able to get services of up to 40 additional schools by having a therapist serve 1 to 2 schools. We would do this by hiring 27 different professionals. 20 of them would be therapists that would be hired by Wake County Public Schools and working directly with the students. This would be at no cost to the students. It would not matter about insurance, co-pays, anything like that. We would also have 2 school-based mental health social workers to assist with processing of referrals. Right now we have 1 who does that. We have 3 mental health crisis response assistants who would go into the schools and classrooms and help students who are having some regulation issues, help not only the student but the teacher to learn some of the strategies that are needed. And then, of course, we would need a program manager and a clinical supervisor to oversee the therapist. The budget also accounts for recruitment and retention bonus. It would be very small, but it would be something that would help. I will say that we are expecting that this will be a challenge, given that the federal funds were frozen for a day a couple of weeks ago, and we are receiving these funds annually for up to 5 years. Right now, we have funds, the fiscal year for them is January through December, so we have funds that have been deposited in our account. We have not pulled them down yet, but we only can get whatever the U.S. Department of Education provides to us, and that is, again, from year to year, moment to moment. We also would be purchasing a secure electronic health record system to maintain all of the confidential records we would need, as well as collecting all the data on this program. And we would have ongoing professional development to train our staff, required materials, different books and resource guides. And then, of course, we would also need to expand our office space a little bit. We wouldn't be creating 27 offices because the therapists would be in schools, but we would need a few spaces at central services and a landing place for the therapists who would need to do some documentation or training, et cetera, outside of the building. So the timeline where we are right now, we just received the funds in January. We just finished the job descriptions, and we're looking at budget codes for them, and we might be able to post this week, if not by next week. Once we do that, so we're a little bit ahead from the timeline that we've proposed, we would start hiring all of the positions over the next few months. And we are asking for support from the board for things that will be coming to you, including the personnel that will be hired, as well as the program evaluator that we would need for this program, the medical documentation system that we would need, and the retainment and recruitment bonuses as well. All of this is so we can launch by the very end of June, 1st of July, as required by the grant. And I will pass this on to Dr. Wilson Norman for the next steps.
So as you have heard a little bit about our seclusion and restraint data, interventions that we're putting in place for our special education students, as well as support for our mental health, we are committed to transparency and open dialogue around this data. That we are working to establish an upcoming community meeting to foster continued collaboration with families who may be impacted by seclusion and restraint, to ensure that they understand the resources and things that are available to their family as well as their individual student. We will also continue to discuss strategies for strengthening prevention approaches with our school teams, our teachers, and our school leaders as we continue to deepen the implementation of the work around prevention, de-escalation, professional development, and things of that nature to really continue to get transparent numbers around seclusion and restraint, and to ensure that we are making sure that our staff is highly trained when situations do arise. So we'll take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson-Norman. And it takes a village. Questions? Ms. Rice.
So first of all, you guys are absolutely amazing. You know, this is one of the subjects that matter to me a lot, which will just really elevate not only our students but our staff to really get down to business, which is about some achievement, right, and making them successful. So thank you for everything that you've shared. I completely agree with, completely on board with. I have just a few questions around in reference to our mental health with the grant. I think that is like music to my ears. So when I read it earlier, I was like, yay. And so my questions that I have is, I noticed with our mental health, and I may have mentioned this before with some folks, well, I'm all for who we need to hire to make things work. I have a little question around our social workers versus our mental health fields, right? So social work and mental health are two separate fields, and they target two separate things. And so I was just curious to what does it look like for us currently with our social work department, and I was trying to find our mental health department, and I don't quite see them connect together. And so I think that the work that we're doing around mental health is fantastic, but how are we looking at with the grant, with divvying up the actual roles when it concerns mental health and social work. I know we have clinical mental health social workers, that's right, and then we have clinical mental health counselors, right? So what does that look like for us in the hiring process of what you're doing?
So for the grant, all of the positions require candidates to be fully clinically licensed. That means they have to be able to diagnose and treat mental health disorders. Some of our staff that we have as social workers, counselors, and psychologists do carry that license. However, it's not within the scope of practice and their normal duties as the schools counselors, social workers, and psychologists. We do that now with our third-party vendors who are in the school-based mental health program. They are all clinically licensed, and we are able to bring that work together. It's very collaborative. So we have that professional who's providing the therapy in the building, and then they work and meet regularly to coordinate their efforts. So social workers are still going to do their good social work practices that they normally do, for example, with attendance, food insecurity, all of the things that they do. Same thing for counselors, psychologists. There's not going to be any duplication of services or any overlap, but there will be a lot of collaboration. There's definitely a different process for the therapist as their specialized staff members who have to be credentialed in that practice.
I have a follow-up, but I'm going to wait.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So is there any potential within the scope of what you guys have laid out for us to look at targeting our mental health separate from our social work department?
What the school-based mental health grant is doing is they're just doing a very narrow approach to our Tier 3 students who need it the most.
Okay.
Social workers and all of the rest of our specialized instructional support personnel are still dealing with mental health issues on a daily basis. They're just not doing it in a way that provides psychotherapy. They're just providing it in a completely different, lower level way. Does that answer your question?
It's answering the question. I think that, first of all, I'm going to stop here. I think that what we're doing is great, and where we're starting at is great. I would just really love to look at us being able to house the way that we do so well with student achievement, to house the departments that fit what's really going on with our students so that resources can really be within that scope of field and versus the other scope, versus, even though collaboration is fantastic and we should collaborate, but when we talk about mental health and we're looking at it, social workers do something a little different than clinical therapists, right? And so we're looking at those pieces, and we need our social workers because we need them to bring these resources to our families and students. But I look at the work that we're doing with restraint and seclusion. That's not a social worker's role. That's not their scope. But a mental health professional, that's their scope. That's what they're trained to do, and looking at that. And so I'm just proud of the work that you all are doing, just looking at what it looks like as we move forward.
And Board Member Rice, if I can add to that, one of the benefits of having this is we're going to have professional development that will basically be for the therapist, but it's also open to anybody who's a SISC member. And what that does is it helps kind of broaden the awareness and education of all of our staff in the building so that they have a little bit more. We're not trying to say that they can now practice in the same way, but any information and education that they can get will help them in their ability to help on a daily basis for students to eventually avoid incidents,
Right.
absences, all those things, right?
Thank you so much.
And all I was going to say is, in a school, the CISP team, which consists of that social worker, psychologist, and counselor, is where we kind of house that at a school level. And so having them be kind of the connection point for some of those services is really, we just want to make sure that there's ongoing follow-up if needed, that they're always having an opportunity to kind of communicate back and forth with one another. But I think that's really why we kind of have it there. But I totally understand what you're saying.
Great work, though. Great work.
Board Chair?
Thank you. So, thank you for the presentation, and this was wonderful information. It sounds like a good program. This coming to us at this point in time, I have some concerns, and I'm just curious in terms of timeline and implementation. When we are seeing a lot of talk about freezing of federal funds for different grants, and proposed elimination of the Department of Education. I believe that's where this program was housed.
That's correct.
How do you factor that in with your timeline and rollout, and can that affect your ability
That
to
is the
promise?
question.
I think we're all, that's
was
what
trying to be nice.
Some of the things that keep me up at night. So we know that as we post positions, we probably have a lot of internal people who might be interested in those roles. I don't want to have anybody move to a position that then all of a sudden is going to be the carpet swept out from under them the next month, the next 6 months. However, we can't say that we're not going to move forward with it and just wait and see what happens. We have it right now. We're going to move forward with that timeline. My hope is that in the next month, 2 or 3, we will have somewhat of an understanding of what the ground is going to look like going forward. We never can tell, but now that we've won this award, we have to move forward with it and kind of see how that plays out. It's tough. I have no guarantees for any of it.
And I think it's important to note, and Dr. Taylor may want to add, this is part of our budget discussion. So right now, this was a grant that we were all very excited about, but we don't know what the future might hold. And so thinking through the review process as positions and things are made, we don't know where it stands, but we are trying to do the work to be ready in the event that it is able to move forward.
Nothing else I could add.
Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions that maybe we can answer? Ms. Edmonds and then Dr. Ng.
Shortly after I got on the board, I had asked and that we had discussion about a parent, this is in reference to sharing with community partners. At one time, I believe there was a special needs parent advisory group that went away, and there was talk about bringing it back. So I just want to say, if that's not back yet, I know we've had some transition in that department. That's something that I'll continue to advocate for. When I was running for office in '22, that I got a lot of input about that, and I know you all know that there's value in hearing from those parents, right? So I think a more structured setting, and maybe it's up and running and I don't know that, but if it's not.
And I'm happy to speak to that. So we did reach out to SEAC with this data, and they are still in a transition period. So we are starting to have conversations again about what a parent advisory committee for Wake County might look like and what that timeline. So we are starting to have those conversations because we recognize that we need to be hearing from our parents on a regular basis, and we don't really have a conduit to do that right now. And so we recognize that is something we need to be moving forward with quickly.
Well, I want to throw my support behind that, because if you can't go through an organization, there's no reason that we can't do it
Right.
ourselves.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Dr. Ng.
I'm just going to tag along with Ms. Edmonds, and when I looked at the slide 20 about targeted support for students, I really feel like at every point in that, on those 6 points, parents should be part of that.
Absolutely, sir.
Part
Yes,
of
sir.
that. So,
Agreed.
Because they know their kids the best, and
Absolutely.
how their brains work, what gets them going, and what helps to de-escalate, things like that. So those, these are things that we need to have a constant conversation with our parents about that.
Agreed. Through IEP meetings, we try to do that. But, even an example of that might be a strategy that's working at home might also work at the school. And so we want to be using those same strategies. In reverse, we might have found a strategy and we want to show the parents and train them on that strategy, because those children that have the most challenging behaviors need as much consistency as possible. So absolutely, we are employing those sorts of things.
And then, I understand that this conversation is about behavioral issues, but I just want to make sure that we point out the fact that, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But there are a bunch of other, students who are in the special needs who are not making, any behavioral issues, and I just don't want them to get left out or not get the attention because the teacher is so much, spends so much time focused on resolving a behavioral issue in the classroom. So just want to make sure that our other kids are getting a good education as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Swanson?
Thank you, and thank you all for pulling this together. I also know how, the progress we've made on this topic, and I'm always great to see us continue to grow because, to your point, Dr. Walker, when we know better, we do better, and this is progress is showing that we are taking the necessary steps to resolve a lot of these issues. I had two things I do, and I'm glad you lifted up the IEP meetings because although they're conducted either annually or whatnot, if parents do see something that it's triggering for a student, they have that right as a member of that IEP team to call an IEP meeting as well. So parents don't have to just wait to that year when the IEP is due for reevaluation or an annual review. They can call for that meeting immediately. So that's a great a great right that a parent has that has never been lost. The question that I had is around some of the language, though, regarding the seclusion rooms. I was wondering, is there ways, because that term can be a little daunting for some students. So I was wondering, is there ways for us, to refer them as de-escalation rooms or something, so students, so therefore we can find ways to remedy the behaviors versus saying this, looking at it as a consequence in a sense. So trying to make it a little bit more friendlier. And so then my last piece, I know you all mentioned that there's trainings that happen twice a year, or you try to get to teachers within 2 years. What is the benefit of having it the 2-year mark versus the 1-year mark? And the only reason why I say, trying to get in front of teachers every year, because we have such a consistent turnover in special education due to not just the behaviors pieces, but progress monitoring and whatnot, just in my experience as a SPED teacher. So I'm just trying to figure out what is ways that we could get into those students, get to those teachers quickly, because it's such a large turnover. And we also have new teachers coming in and giving them those supports on the front end versus the back end or the latter part.
I'm sorry. I would say, Mr. Swanson, we know that we're not getting in front of teachers enough. The various calendars, the volume of teachers versus staff, but we are really looking at building in a structure where we can be more focused regionally and we'll be able to train and support staff members. Because I think the way that we're doing it now, every 2 years is what it takes to get to everyone, but we know that that's not working. And Lisa, you may want to...
Yeah, the first thing I want to speak to is you talked about that annual review. I want to make sure that you all are aware, if a child has a behavior intervention plan, the expectation is that we review that behavior intervention plan every 30 to 45 days, right? Because behaviors are changing all the time. And we're reviewing that data. We're either saying, hey, this plan's working, we're going to continue, or this piece is not really working, so let's change this up a little bit. And again, that's where for some of our children that have really significant issues, ASNAC really is helpful to us because they help us gather the right data to make the right decisions. Additionally, Dr. Wilson-Nolan spoke about with our staff, we're only able to get in front of them about every 2 years. But that's for renewal. So we try to get to new staff as quickly as we can. But we're asking for a renewal of that CPI every 2 years. Again, understanding that's probably not enough, but it's not the initial. As soon as we get new staff members that are in places that could need that de-escalation, we are getting them up here as a priority. And I just wanted to clarify both of those things.
It's not just special education teachers either. It's general education teachers
Correct.
as well.
Administrators.
Yeah.
Correct.
I just want to extend an invitation to this conversation to what my colleagues have said about community engagement in families. And so I just got a message earlier. Representative Monica Johnson-Hostler, Commissioner Tara Waters, and myself will actually be hosting a town hall on March the 10th in reference to mental health. So if there's any information you would like for us to have there or to share with families, or if anyone from this particular department would like to share something in reference to that, because we're reaching out to some of the community partners that you were talking to so that their families can be aware, to know that we're here to support or to hear their thoughts for any of that, if that will be helpful, since we're talking about collaborating with parent engagement and making sure we do that.
Thank you. I did have a question going back to the positive learning environments piece. I remember when I was teaching, and I realized we can't do this in the broader system, but we had a group of occupational therapists come in and assess rooms or talk about, ways that teachers can help kids who have proprioceptive needs that may not need an IEP or a 504, or vestibular needs because they're wiggling on their chair. And so as we're talking about developing engaging spaces, is that point that sparks that, is that all classrooms in Wake County, or is that starting with, like, we know there's a need in Ms. Jones's classroom, and then we'll go from there? I'm curious about that piece.
So we are spending a lot of time focused, because that's a part of our core, that classroom expectations, right?
Yeah.
Classroom expectations, school-wide expectations, and really effective social emotional learning is our core. We are spending a good bit of time really talking about what does it mean when I say classroom expectations. It is some of it is don't hit your neighbor, but it is also, how do you design that classroom? What procedures are you putting in place? How do you know, to your point, what is in the design based on the students in your classroom that will best effectively create an environment where all students can learn and learn effectively. We will be strategic with that to some degree based on the students that we know that are in that classroom, but we are also really reaching out across the board to all teachers. We've created an asynchronous course this year. We have been promoting that. We just did a walk with all of our principals this past Thursday, as a matter of fact, looking at classroom environments. It was a great day to have an opportunity to really focus our efforts on what does the environment of that classroom look like, and what am I seeing or what am I not seeing, as the case may be. So I do think we're really trying to take a comprehensive view of what that looks like.
Any final questions? Thank you all so much. We will see some of you again in October when we discuss this topic once again, and some of you will not be here. On to bigger things. So next, we are going to talk about Restart and the continued authorization process. So we'll shuffle and
Beautiful, diverse children.
We're gonna get started. We're supposed to yeah, we just got the data. Should we pull that off? So I mean, Lisa just sent it. So I don't know if people are gonna have time to look at it.
I was going to say, do you think folks have enough time to look at it, digest it, or do you think we want to?
If people want to make a decision.
So we're going to have a motion anyway to amend the business agenda.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, so you've already got a motion to amend, so we can.
welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having us today. Can't believe it's been a little while since we've been before you to talk about Restart, and so happy to be here today to talk with you about Restart Schools. So today we are going to look at three different things. So we're going to provide an overview and background of Restart Schools. I think most of you have been through that process before, so we'll be light on that side. We'll share information with you about the Cohort 2 continued authorization results, and then we will identify newly eligible Restart Schools and kind of have a discussion around those. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with a Restart overview, and I failed to introduce my colleague that is with me here, Mr. Christopher McCabe, who is one of our area superintendents as well, so thank you.
Never seen him before.
Never seen him before. Kind of got a sketchy face. Yeah. I appreciate him being here. So in looking at our Restart overview, if you'll recall, this process has been in place for some time. This was tied to a law that was passed back in 2010 in looking at the reform of continually low-performing schools. Then they moved forward. March 2016, the State Board approved a new policy specifically tied to that information. When they established Restart Schools, the goals for Restart Schools were pretty simple. Remove barriers that may be interfering with the educational process, utilize charter-like flexibilities to address school and student needs, model innovative instructional practices, and then leverage flexibilities to increase student achievement. And so with that, they created Restart Schools. And in order to be eligible to become a Restart School, they become eligible when they are identified as recurring low performing. We'll talk about definitions in a few minutes, but recurring low performing means that the school has been low performing, identified as low performing 2 of the last 3 years. Okay? So kind of keep that in mind as we go forward. So Restart in the Wake County Public School System started that year that it was put in place in 2016. The state board approved a request for us to move forward with 2 Restart schools. And that started off with Barwell Road Elementary and Walnut Creek Elementary. You probably remember last year around this time we had a conversation about their cohort and how they met the academic gain and stuff in order to move forward. So the purpose of Restart Schools and WCPSS is to increase student achievement by utilizing identified flexibilities for addressing resources, learning experiences, and targeted needs. As always, we like to show that the Restart model and the work that we're doing with the Restart model is tied to our strategic plan as well. And so that's really important as we look at the work and stuff that we're doing there. I want to share with you a couple of examples of school flexibilities that are utilized within the district. And then we have the privilege in a few minutes, we have a couple of principals that will share with us as well that will give you really specific examples of how they're utilizing those flexibilities. So in terms of utilizing lap salaries for schools, one of the things that the principals are able to do is to have additional learning opportunities and support for students. This can be things like high dosage tutoring. This can be bringing on instructional coaches to support teachers and have PD within the school. It also can provide support for supplemental curriculum resources and assessment tools. We're also very careful. I know that when I say supplemental curriculum materials, my colleague here kind of stresses, but it's really important that it's not taking place of the core curriculum that's within the district. It is definitely supplemental in how they can provide additional supports for the students. Another way that schools utilize human resource flexibility is that they are able to convert positions, including teacher assistant positions or instructional assistant positions, that other schools are not able to do. And so that's definitely a flexibility that can be meaningful and helpful to schools to address staffing and student achievement needs within the school. They also have the opportunity to hire and place teachers that may not be certified within those areas. And so sometimes that can be, you have to be really careful about how you utilize that flexibility. And sometimes people ask a lot of questions around that, like, why would you put a non-certified person in that position? But I think our principals, one of our principals today will speak to that and how they've had success with that. So it's good that it's a flexibility. It doesn't mean that everyone has to utilize it. They also had the opportunity to provide additional compensation. They can look at things like sign-in bonuses for our high needs areas. There's been times when we've looked at increasing pay grades. So those are 2 different types of flexibilities that the schools have that they're able to utilize with the Restart model. So then in terms of Restart performance, so the way that I'll explain this information that's listed here on the chart is it's kind of like a progression, right? And so we think of it as a flow. So over the past year, we had schools that were really successful. We had 7 restart schools to exit low performing status. And so that's really good. And that's the goal. We want schools to be able to move out of low performing status. We had 4 restart schools that exited recurring low performing status. And so again, that definition is, that means they've not been low performing the last 2 of the past 3 years, right? And so what you can see is we're getting to the ideal state, which is now we have 3 schools that remained out of recurring low performing status. And so what that means is out of 3 years, those schools have not been identified as low performing. And so that's kind of the progression that we're working with and where we're trying to move schools. So we want to move them to exiting low performing. We want to move them next to the exiting recurring low performing. And then we want to keep them where they remain out of low performing status. And so that's the goal and the mission of Restart Schools. And so as we do that, it's important to know too, a lot of people will ask, so then when I get to the point and I'm no longer recurring low performing, do you just take all my resources away? And so what we're trying to do is to be really strategic, provide scaffolds and a bridge and supports for schools as they do better and be able to ease and pull away with some of those resources so that we can, again, place that attention on the schools that have higher needs. One of the other things that we're looking at and exploring with this process is how can we structure an exit process for schools once they've been identified as Restart. And so we feel like this progression kind of gives us the model because when schools get to that bottom tier where they are remaining out of recurring low performing status, those are ideal schools to start having a conversation about, do these schools need to continue to be Restart schools? All right. So as I mentioned earlier, we have two very special guests with us today. So at this time, I would like to invite Principal Blake and Principal Feldman to join us at the table. These are two of our principals, two of our Restart principals that have a lot of success with utilizing the model. And we've just asked that they would come forward and share a little bit of information about the work and stuff that they're doing within their schools and how the Restart model has impacted their schools. Thank you, ladies, for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, to share with you a little bit about how the flexibilities and lab salary have been instrumental in Green Leadership and World Languages Magnet Elementary Schools transformation. So one of the ways that we've used I think one of the most impactful ways that we've used our flexibility is with staffing. By being able to convert instructional assistant positions, we've been able to expand student support roles, particularly through interventionists and instructional coaches. These positions have provided direct academic supports while also strengthening core classroom instruction. Our coaching model at Green has been a game changer. We have 3 dedicated instructional coaches that support grade bands in K1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. This structure has ensured that we've had consistent, embedded, ongoing professional development for our teachers, that we've targeted supports that have been aligned with the district standards, and been able to give immediate and ongoing feedback to enhance the teaching practices in the school. By investing in coaches, we built teacher capacity, ensuring that instructional improvements are sustainable and directly impact student achievement. Another flexibility that we've utilized is one around curriculum, and we have strengthened our ELA instruction across all grade levels by ensuring cohesion and consistency with utilizing EL Education K-5. We've also provided supplemental resources to support small group instruction in literacy K-5 and in math 3-5, allowing us to target student needs effectively. These enhancements have resulted in more engaging, rigorous, and differentiated instruction, which has helped support our students with meeting higher levels of achievement. Another flexibility that we've utilized is the extension of learning. We've been able to provide extended time with utilizing tutoring for literacy and math for our learners to be able to provide extra support for struggling students, as well as reinforcing key skills and increasing the confidence and engagement in core subject areas. This has allowed us to close some achievement gaps as well as accelerate learning in various areas. And then lastly, we've utilized our flexibility for professional learning and growth for our staff members. We are able to provide quarterly professional planning days where our teachers spend time with their instructional coaches and do a deep dive into the upcoming quarter's curriculum and really outlining and ensuring that there is coherence and synergy around all of the standards and the lessons being utilized. We've also offered professional learning on instructional resources to build capacity, in particular with our staff members who work with our students with special needs and our multilingual learners. By prioritizing this professional learning, we've been able to empower teachers with the knowledge and tools needed to support our diverse student population. So the results speak for themselves. In just 2 years, with consistent implementation of the flexibilities that I've been able to outline, Green Elementary has moved out of low performing status, has increased proficiency by 15.2 percentage points, and raised the growth index by 2.74 percentage points. These achievements were made possible. These achievements were made possible through predictable, intentional, and strategic use of Restart and lab salary flexibilities, allowing us to invest in the right people, the right resources, and the right structures to really focus and hone in on student success.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
And that is a lot of hard work from you, your team, coming in, and I mean, it's a beautiful 5-minute summary of years of effort and compassion and work towards students. So thank you for being here to share that.
Thank you for having me here today and letting me share the story of Dillard Drive and how we used our Restart funds. But I echo Ms. Blake that the Restart funds play a pivotal and critical role in enhancing student achievement. They improve instructional quality as well as create an environment of conducive learning. So a few ways that I use my Restart funds: we did enhance instructional support. Restart funds allowed me to hire additional instructional staff which work closely with students and teachers to address learning gaps. We were able to provide small group instruction and individualized support to ensure that students received the attention they needed to master grade level content. Also, with my additional staff, I was able to reduce class size in Math A classes, which we know historically perform below grade level. And then resources. After my entire math department went to training here at Wake County in engaging mathematics with hands-on learning, I used Restart funds to purchase instructional materials such as class sets and manipulatives for all math teachers that allowed them to apply their learning, which the data showed improved the outcomes. I also was able to use extended learning opportunities with Restart funds. We're hosting after-school tutoring, not only for math, but also for ELA, to provide our students with additional time to reinforce learning and to accelerate progress toward proficiency. Family engagement has been huge. Dillard has a high population of families where English is not their first language. I utilized Restart funds to provide extended employment opportunities for staff members to that dedicated time before school and after school to engage with families, especially families of multi-language learners. These efforts strengthen school-to-home partnerships by facilitating communication, offering academic resources, and addressing student needs, ensuring that all families at Dillard, regardless of language barriers, had the support necessary to help their children succeed. Restart flexibility also allowed me to strategically staff classrooms by placing highly effective teachers in areas where they were needed most, even if they were not traditionally certified in those subjects. For example, I had a math teacher who was certified up to 6th grade, successfully taught 7th grade math, and exceeded growth last year. Similarly, my 8th grade science teacher, who holds certification in math rather than science, also exceeded growth. This flexibility ensured that students received high-quality instruction from skilled educators, leading to measurable academic success. So in summary, Restart funds have been instrumental in supporting our student achievement at Dillard Drive Magnet Middle School by providing that flexibility needed to allocate resources effectively and strengthen our family engagement. The evidence is clear. Our school met or exceeded growth in all student groups last year, demonstrating the impact of this strategic. So Restart funds provide that consistency and structure necessary to drive academic success, close the achievement gaps, and ensure that all students thrive. Thank you.
Principal Bowman, many thanks to you and your team for all of their efforts as well, and with middle schoolers.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, ladies, for being here. And the work, as they've stated, speaks for itself. But what we know is that they've been able to be very strategic and very intentional and stuff with the resources and the work that they're doing. One of the things I think that the area superintendents would agree on is that as we've gone through this process, we understand that there's not a one-size-fits-all model that's out there. And so being able to utilize this in specific ways to meet the needs of their individual schools provides them the opportunity to have this level of success. So I know this is not easy for them to do, so again, we thank you for being here today. Are there any questions for our principals before they leave, before they step out? I know they're a little stressed about tomorrow.
No, Dr. Taylor, all good, right?
Taking care of it.
So I'm wondering, how has the school district ever been able to put principles like these in front of, I assume it's the General Assembly, not just DPI, when it comes to talking about and advocating for expanding Restart program money, or making this what Restart is, making that the norm for any school as we're sort of advocating, and then providing the data behind it, because we can advocate to some degree, but they are, to me, as I'm listening, far better advocates.
So I don't know about Wake County in the past. I know that there have been several opportunities for principals to come and talk to the state board about Restart. I would imagine they've made similar kind of opportunities available for the Joint Legislative Committee. So I would think that they have been. I don't know specifically about Wake, but I can't speak to the state board, and there have been opportunities.
I mean, to me, it doesn't sound like we need to be in front of the state board so much as people in the General Assembly, and I could be wrong. So,
No, I mean,
but-
we've done that with commissioners as well, and it depends on the body that you're speaking to and how they're interacting. But I agree that our principals understand this and can speak to the results
I'm just wondering if we don't just
much better.
issue an invitation. I mean, they are in Raleigh all the time, and how do we proactively try it? They can say no and decline, and that's
We'll-
fine, but
We'll ponder on that one. I don't know that we have an answer right now.
no, but I
because-
want that out there.
Well, I think one of the things that we can do is always extend an invitation to anybody in the General Assembly, but I do know with the Joint Legislative Committee, that's usually where they request that you come and talk in front of them. And you probably know more about requests from the General Assembly than any of us, but that's normally what will happen. They will make a request to come and testify in front of the committee and have questions. But extending an invitation, that's something that we could always do.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation. I had a question really for each of you. Principal Blake, you were talking about you were really able to show positive impacts from your decisions to use funds for more coaches and interventionists rather than IAs. Was that right?
Yes, well, the ability to convert some of our hours for those positions.
I mean, is your experience with that now, having operated and seen the results come back in, is that something you think is a best practice? If we had that power, it would improve scores at other schools?
I think giving leaders the opportunity to determine what the needs are and having the flexibility to do what is best for your staff, I think is huge and important. I think, being able to leverage Restart in the form of lab salary when, having a shortage or adjustment in our Title I funding was helpful in that regard, to be able to have that flexibility to keep some consistency moving forward when ESSER funds and Title I funds were pivoting in another direction.
And then, I guess it could, either of you could answer this, but Principal Feldman, I'm curious also just from a middle school perspective too. When you're making these changes, you're looking to see, here are teacher materials or supplemental materials, or here are these different needs, and you have Title I funds and you have Restart funds. How do you determine kind of like which pool to tap? Which gives you the most flexibility, and how valuable are those funds?
Well, year to year, it changes based on what we need and what our kids need. And when we look at the data, we really looked at staffing as well. And for Dillard, we are a very large middle school with a very high free and reduced lunch. And so we really wanted to make sure that our class sizes were smaller, especially in our math classes. So we were just really intentional about how to use that. And then having intervention classes, which had 15 students in it, where they would get targeted instruction in Tier 3 strategy. So it was really just about, for us, it was all about staffing. And so I used a lot of the Title I money as I could for staffing, and then a lot of the flexibility for the certification.
So it sounds like both of you are saying that really having the ability to kind of assess what's going on with your students from year to year and adjust it was that right?
And getting the input from our staff, what they need as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Ng?
Yes, so thank you so much for the presentation. And I'm channeling Ms. Caulfield, who's not here. She always talks about, having that restart type flexibility that, you guys exemplify what is possible to have that kind of flexibility. And so, I think that that's something that we can certainly, try to advocate for greater, to the General Assembly, to have that kind of flexibility. But certainly, having those the money to try to kind of be creative and using it, that is a big part of it too, right? So, if you have to choose, between the flexibility that you have versus the funds that go along with it, just as a
Dr. Ng.
just exercise.
This is not the Kobayashi Maru.
What is that?
No win scenario.
No, but I know that ideally, you want to have both. But if you have to, choose one or the other, which one is more beneficial from your standpoint as a principal?
When I think about the ones that have been most impactful for our school, it's having access to the lab salary and the flexibility to utilize that. Both would be ideal, but if I had to choose one.
I would agree. Just the funds that help with our family engagement, with our families before and after school was really, built that community of our school, as we saw by our group, subgroup data, and also the ability to have the support of additional instructional staff is imperative.
As you can see, both are necessary for the success.
I agree.
And I would say over time, what's happened is we've really become more efficient at how we built that model in order to help the two work together, right? And so one is just as important as the other, and I think that's what they're saying. So,
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Overman, I'm guessing for the second part, we're going to let our principals go?
We are.
Okay. I just want to
Thank
make
you.
sure
Thank you all for being
that we're
here.
not, thank you very much,
Thank you, Ms.
feeling tied to this space.
Right.
I'm sure they have a billion other things to do. So, all right.
So thank you. The next portion of our presentation focuses on the continued authorization process. And so again, this is the second time that we've gone through this process, and we're kind of wrapping up our cohort 2 process for schools. And so just as a reminder, the 3 things that you would take away from this process is that there are 3 possible outcomes by policy. One is that you've provided continued authorization. 2 would be that we have to reapply in order to continue the restart model. And then 3, it would be you're at a point where you want to submit an application to exit. Okay, and so those are the 3 takeaways in terms of that process and how that process is structured. Now, I know that we're going to have an inclement weather day tomorrow, so this kind of highlights that in detail on this model. So if you need something to read tomorrow, would be the ideal time to review. Very detailed, but very succinct in terms of the steps that schools have to take to get to this process. So in looking at this year's group of schools, we had 17 cohort 2 restart schools in this process cycle. And so of those 17 schools, 14 schools met the academic gain needed for continued authorization. So again, that's a really good number. 17 total schools, 14 schools met the academic gain. Last year, we only had 2 schools to go through that process, and so this was massive work for our senior administrators and area superintendents for this work and the principals. So thanks to all that participated in that work. In terms of the 3 schools that did not make academic gain, they're narrowed down now to really 2 different options. And so the 2 options that we're looking at for the 3 schools that did not meet academic gain are to reapply or submit an application to exit. And so based on the information, the current challenges that they have, they're still facing the same challenges. They're still faced with the same decisions. The area superintendents have worked really closely to develop a comprehensive support plan for what it would look like if we reapply for those 3 schools. And so you can see what we have bulleted here on this list are the different things that have been taken into consideration for those schools and the different things that are in place for those 3 schools. So I'll give you a chance to just kind of review that list. And so as you can tell within that list, there are greater accountability structures that are built into that bulleted list. And so we'll talk a little bit more about our recommendation moving forward, but want you to understand the takeaway from this slide is that there are 3 schools that did not meet the academic gain, and the area superintendents have developed comprehensive plans to support and help move those schools forward to where they need to be if we submit a restart application for those schools. All right, so now we will talk about restart applications and where we are. Earlier, we talked about the fact that there are currently 40 schools that are utilizing this model. There are 6 additional schools that are eligible for restart for next year. But of those 6, 2 schools are eligible that were not eligible last year. So we had 4 schools last year that we did not submit an application for. So we looked at a different process and looking at the data for those schools and looking at some things that we could do differently. How can we try to address some of these needs before we submit a restart application? Prior on, when Restart was first approved, as a school was eligible, we'd move them forward because if nothing else, they would get the flexibility of class sizes and the ability to convert IAs. And so that was a benefit to us at that point. Now we're at a point where we're able to kind of look and see, are there different things that we can do with those schools? So last year, we did not submit applications for 4 of the 6 schools. We used criteria to determine whether or not we were going to submit applications on those schools. And then those schools received some additional resources and support from a different area, from targeted assistance work that we do. Based on keeping those 4 schools out, we're excited to say that 2 of those 4 schools are no longer low performing. And so, in fact, one of the schools was one of the highest growth schools in the district. And so it just shows us that if we do some things differently with those schools that are kind of on the cusp, that we can possibly keep them or move them out of low performance status. So these are the schools that we were talking about. So the 4 schools that you see shaded in blue are the schools that we did not submit applications on last year. Because the eligibility is tied to recurring low performing, those schools are still eligible to be submitted as an application for this year. The 2 schools that you see in white are the 2 new schools that are eligible for this school year. So again, the criteria that I talked about earlier is located in the pink box. Those are things that the area superintendents have worked really closely with the principal to identify and to determine whether or not we needed to submit applications for those schools moving forward. So in summary, if we were in a training session with our principals, we'd go around the room, each one of you would repeat one of the bullets so that we could be sure that you've retained it. We're not going to do that for the sake of time today. But these are the takeaways that we want you to have or to think about. We've talked about the cohort 2 schools that met the academic gain. We talked about the 3 schools that did not, and that we have comprehensive support plans established for those schools. We talked about the breakout with the 6 schools, and we talked about the criteria to determine submission. And we've also talked about the additional resources and support. So in terms of next steps, what we're going to ask you about in terms of support is looking to continue the Restart model with the authorized 14 Cohort 2 schools. So the state has already said they've met the academic gain. It's fine for them to continue with the Restart model. The next step is to look at reapplying for the 3 Cohort 2 schools that did not meet the target. And as I stated earlier, they still face significant challenges, but we feel that with the comprehensive support plans that have been identified and developed, that we can address those needs and move them out of low performance status. So, Mr. McCabe, I know that you're working really closely with one of those schools. Is there anything that you would like to say about that process?
Yeah, and so the comprehensive support plans, just to provide a little bit of context for it, it really is a cross-departmental work in Wake County, as well as some training that we have them going to be going to later this spring around, specifically targeted around leaders in low-performing schools and developing strategic plans to come out of low-performing status. So it's a comprehensive effort that involves also the primary support of the executive leadership coach. Each of those schools has one of our executive leadership coaches in the schools and on at least a weekly basis supporting the coaches.
So normally at this time, what we would do is ask you to consider new schools that we're putting forward for applications. But however, in reviewing our criteria and looking at the information, we are happy to report that at this point, we're not going to submit any new applications for Restart Schools next year. The 2 that have been identified, we are going to continue to look at providing them additional supports and resources, similar to what we did with the previous year. So really what we would be doing in a sense is just resubmitting or reapplying for the 3 schools that did not meet the academic gain. That concludes our presentation. So we're more than welcome to answer any questions that you may have if you have time.
I'm just in my head going through the different iterations of Restart,
You've been here, you have
Renaissance, all of it.
Yes.
And so, questions from board members. Ms. Rice and Ms. Edmonds.
Okay. So I love the work and the outcomes that we're showing that we have, which is really fantastic, and that you guys always have a plan to help our schools to progress. I was just curious about with our Restart model, and it may be something that I'm just not aware of. I know we have 40 schools that are utilizing the model. Are these all the schools that we have identified as low performing? I know this is our cohort, but...
Right. So, no.
Okay.
They're eligible once they've been low performing 2 out of the last 3 years.
Okay.
So you do have schools that dip into low performance status and then dip out.
And so my second part...
The schools on that list of 6, some of those were low performing, but they're not listed.
Right. And so my thought process was, I know we're talking about Restart, but are there any things that we are able to learn or take away from this model that we're using to apply to our other schools, just for a professional development type of model or support with them through area superintendents that might cause them to rise, to stay out of the 2 to 3 because they're not a part of the particular cohort. So I was just curious about, because this really great work that the Restart model is doing and the support that I know that they're getting from coaches. And so I was just curious as to how we're able to utilize those streams to help our other schools to rise them up as well, but by taking some of those targets out. I just didn't know if that was something that we're able to do or doing in this process.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yes, because we work so closely with both sets of schools, we are able to cross over and carry over some of those strategies. And then so if a school is not identified as Restart and they have some additional funding, additional resources, or they're able to convert a certain position, then they're able to replicate some of the things on a much smaller scale that the Restart schools are doing. I would say one of the greatest takeaways that we've found and that we see as we travel and visit other Restart schools across the state is the ability to coach teachers within their setting. So the ability to be there on the ground when they're teaching and to give them different strategies and things to utilize, to leverage in order to improve student achievement.
And my final question is, how is the reception of may not sound so great when I say it, but how is the reception of staff receiving certain levels of support? Because sometimes we don't like to be told we may not be doing something as well as we think we're doing it. So how is that working for us?
That's a great question. So we've been doing this for a little while, right? And I think the cycle is always the same. In the beginning, it's kind of like you have the conversation and say you're eligible for Restart, and they're like, oh, because they feel that, they know that and realize that they've been identified based on being, low performing 2 out of the last 3 years. But then they start to process, and we start to work with them in terms of looking at a model that you can put in place to have the structures and systems that are needed. And then they, really start to enjoy it. They're excited about it at that point. They start thinking about the different things that they can do and what they can leverage. So it's kind of a cycle. In the beginning, it can kind of be like, and then they're really excited by the end. And then if you try to take it away from them, they,
Thanks for all the hard work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for hosting us. Good job.
Thank you. I was here when Barwell and Walnut Creek presented. I don't know if that was in 2016 or not, but I remember it was so exciting to hear what this flexibility and additional funding could do. I remember equating it to the results we were seeing with the HELPS program. I won't go into that, but I just remember that very clear, exciting, just what it could do for a school. And I just want to make sure I understand the state's expectation. It is for these Restart schools to come out of Restart, but then when that happens and the school is doing better and achieving where we need it to be and want it to be, all of that flexibility and all of that funding goes away. Unless we compensate for it, right?
So actually the way it's set up, and it's kind of evolved over time, but the way it's set up is like once you receive that status, you have that status. But every 5 years, you go through that continued authorization process. And if you're continuing to meet the academic gain, then you can continue within that model. So the state doesn't take it away from you unless you fall short of the academic gain. And then at that point, you still have other options
Right.
to reapply.
Yeah, you were this was really thorough in explaining to us the process, but I wasn't clear about that piece because I was wanting to know what kind of a strain it is on us if you come out to compensate for but I'm thrilled to hear that. So, and just my last question, am I correct, was Walnut Creek the only one that utilized the calendar flexibility, or out of the other 40, how many have utilized the calendar flexibility? Because I just don't remember.
Yes. So when we first started, I want to say there were 3 different schools that utilized the calendar flexibility. But what happened is, because we already have so many different calendars within the district, it was creating kind of conflict for the feeder schools. So we kind of put a pause on, changing calendars. And the calendar flexibility is really interesting. You really have to build in structures, like if you're going to do a year-round calendar, for instance, you have to build in structures to continue instruction after the track-out period, or during the track-out period. And so, but at that time, we did put a pause on any flexibilities utilizing the calendar flexibility for that purpose, because we have so many different calendars, and it's just hard to align those calendars at the next level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Pablo?
Thank you. I was listening on the way in, so I did catch up, but I might have missed in the transition of coming inside, so if I did, I apologize, and you don't need to just fill me in. But with you said there are several schools that did not apply. What would be the advantage or disadvantage of not? Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So we talked about the schools that we did not submit applications for. And what we're trying to create is almost like a phase system.
Right.
Like before we fully submit an application, we want to be sure that the school does not have additional resources there, and there's not additional things that we can do as a district to support them before moving forward with another Restart application. And so there are things that we provide with them. It may be support in terms of months of employment. It could be support in terms of specific resources. It could be things that we do for them, like identifying them as the walk location when our principals walk or our assistant principals do local walks. So different things like that. And the advantage is it really gives us an opportunity to flesh out the structures and systems that need to be in place in those schools. Sometimes they're in place, they're just not quite where they need to be, and that infusion of that additional support provides them the opportunity to get there before being identified as a Restart student.
And just to clarify, when you get the Restart status, it allows you these opportunities to do that. Those helps for your school. But even though you keep the flexibility and the advantage of having that from that program, you're still the ideal result is to not be labeled, for lack of a better word. If I'm understanding correctly, before that didn't apply were pretty much out of needing to be Restart?
No, but they may not need as much as a full Restart school would need.
Okay.
So we're going to try to work with them first to see if we can kind of fix those smaller things before moving forward. The ideal thing is say we go through this process this year and they come up again and they're still eligible next year, which they would be because it's 2 out of 3 years, then we can always submit an application for them next year. So thank you.
Thank you. So if you look at the schools that are on the Restart list, they, without jumping to conclusions, they also seem to be schools with high free and reduced lunch. Is that accurate?
There are a lot that have high free and reduced lunch lunches.
Is at some point, I'd like to see like the correlation between the Restart schools and the schools that might qualify for Title I funds, and then any that are also supported by magnet funds, just to see, what those investments are doing, the impact they're having. We heard a little bit about that in the previous presentation, but I just want to be really clear, so it's not conjecture, but just where we can really see that the schools that have been identified as qualifying for Restart are some that have maybe some of the most needs in terms of the economic status of the students.
I would definitely say that is good. It's our most challenged schools.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Dr. Wilson-Norman, will we see you again?
You will, but I have 2 more meetings, I think.
Okay.